Well, a former aide to Governor Hochul and Andrew Cuomo
has been charged with secretly acting as an agent of the Chinese government.
Case involving millions of dollars, gifts and gourmet duck.
On Tuesday afternoon, a former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul was brought before a Brooklyn federal court. Ms. Linda Sun and her husband were accused of working for the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party while holding high-level positions in New York for over a decade. On the same day that American federal prosecutors charged Linda Sun and her husband, the Washington Post released a lengthy report following a 6-month investigation. The report alleged that the Chinese consulate and its diplomats played a role in encouraging and facilitating violence against anti-Beijing protesters during Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to San Francisco in November 2023. These two cases have sparked widespread concern, both in the US and globally, about the extent of China's influence in foreign governments and its shift from economic to political involvement.
Xi Jinping has said it's our time to move to the center of the world stage. So China intends to displace us. Its technology competition, its espionage, its foreign assistance, much more than military activity.
This is James Andrew Lewis, Senior Vice President at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. With a background in the US Foreign Service, he has been instrumental in shaping pivotal policies on cybersecurity, encryption, and high-tech exports to China.
Until the last couple of years, most Chinese espionage, most Chinese cyber espionage was focused on technology and acquiring technology or commercial secrets, right? They were very successful. There's numbers of cases between aircraft design and crane design. And even my favorite is still stealing the formula for White House paint. I guess it was a really shiny White House paint. So on the commercial and technology side, this has been going on for decades. The political side is relatively new. And
for 15 years, Linda Sun worked in the New York administration. The detailed indictment against her outlines the various actions she allegedly took on behalf of the Chinese consulate in exchange for personal benefits, making the story both intriguing and alarming. In 2019, during a visit to the United States, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen made a stop in New York City, a move that drew strong objections from the Chinese government, which pressured the US to block her visit. Prosecutors have disclosed that Taiwanese officials had invited both Linda Sun, then an aide to Governor Andrew M. Cuomo, and the governor himself to a formal banquet in Tsai's honor. However, Sun did not inform the governor about it, and instead told Taiwanese representatives that Cuomo would be attending a staff event in the Catskills. According to court documents, Sun wrote to a Chinese official, "I've already blocked it." On the same day as the banquet, Sun allegedly joined leaders of Chinese community groups in Manhattan to protest against Tsai. A 65-page indictment highlights the benefits Sun allegedly received in exchange, such as free travel, event tickets, and assistance in promoting a close friend's freight business in Queens. She even managed to secure the services of a private chef from the Chinese consulate. In July 2021, 6 Nanjing-style salted ducks prepared by a Chinese consulate's chef were delivered to her residence. 4 months later, another batch arrived, with additional deliveries continuing over the following months. In return, prosecutors claim Sun worked to ensure that state officials, particularly Governor Cuomo, avoided making public statements condemning China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims, restricted Taiwanese officials' access to the governor's office, erased references to Taiwan from official state communications, issued unauthorized invitations to Chinese officials, and facilitated proclamations for Chinese government officials without formal approval. Since President Xi took power in China, the country's espionage efforts have significantly increased, especially targeting the US. According to James Lewis, Chinese espionage has cost the American economy $600 billion in recent years. In 2020, the FBI revealed that it opened a new counterintelligence case related to China every 10 hours.
Of the nearly 5,000 active FBI counterintelligence cases currently underway across the country, almost half are all related to China.
That same year, the Trump administration shut down the Chinese consulate in Houston, accusing its diplomats of economic espionage.
That was a very effective action because the Chinese consulate was the center, was the headquarters for espionage across the entire American Southeast. And the consulate itself was located near one of the leading biomedical research facilities in the US. So it was very disruptive to Chinese activities. It's a fairly traditional tool in espionage. You catch someone spying, you throw out their diplomats, you close the consulate. I was glad the Trump administration did it, but it's something we could probably do in this New York case, but it's just part of a larger solution that we have not yet figured out.
In response, the Chinese Foreign Ministry called these reasons unbelievably ridiculous. In 2017, American officials halted a Chinese project to build a Chinese ornate garden in Washington, D.C., funded with $100 million due to concerns over potential espionage near the U.S. Capitol. Additionally, U.S. intelligence agencies imposed sanctions on the Chinese tech company Huawei over cybersecurity threats. And in 2023, an incident occurred that was reminiscent of the early Cold War when balloons were used for espionage. Modern satellite technology had rendered this method obsolete, but in February 2023, Americans were alarmed when a suspected Chinese balloon flew over the East Coast. The US claimed the balloon was being used by China for surveillance and subsequently shot it down. In recent years, as China ramped up its efforts to monitor dissenting voices worldwide, especially those from Tibet, Xinjiang, or Hong Kong, the US Justice Department, particularly the Brooklyn Attorney's Office, intensified its efforts to counter Chinese influence across the United States. Just last month, a Chinese man named Shujun Wang, who posed as a scholar and pro-democracy activist, was convicted of gathering information on dissidents and passing it to Beijing. For more than a decade, he lived a double life. In April last year, the FBI arrested 2 men accused of operating a covert police station for the Chinese government, tasked with tracking Chinese dissidents residing in the US. The Spanish civil rights group Safeguard Defenders reported in 2022 that dozens of Chinese police stations were secretly operating in cities worldwide, engaging in surveillance and harassment. Most of these stations were allegedly located in European countries such as Spain, Italy, the UK, France, and the Netherlands. The US, however, faced challenges at home while introducing its own Chinese espionage activities.
In the Trump administration, the Attorney General Barr, and FBI Director Wray launched something called the China Initiative, because Chinese espionage had reached unprecedented levels. And it didn't work out so well because, people assume rightly that there's a concern that it's racist somehow, right? And so the Chinese American community was very upset because you're saying everyone who's from China is a spy.
Despite the efforts by US officials, Mr. Lewis says that the US has failed to counter cyber attacks.
Well, we're not successfully countering them. I mean, that's been one of the great failures of American policy, is that in the intervening 20 years since China got the internet, the number of espionage incidents has increased every year. So whatever we're doing, it's not working.
For decades, the American film industry has been a key tool for promoting Western culture and values globally. Hollywood serves as a form of soft power for the US, shaping culture and public opinion around the world. However, China now holds significant sway over the industry. In 2020, China surpassed North America as the world's largest film market, giving it considerable influence. To be released in China, films must receive government approval, and topics deemed unsuitable by Chinese authorities are censored. For many Hollywood films, gaining access to China can be the difference between profit and loss.
The most effective Chinese influence effort has been against Hollywood, because they have basically said any American film that casts China in a bad light will not be allowed to be shown in China. And that means that you never see a film in the United States about China being bad. You'll see ISIS, you'll see Russia, you'll see North Korea, but you'll never see China.
Both countries have a long history of infiltrating each other's affairs through every available means. To gain military, economic, and technological advantages, they don't hesitate to steal secret documents, use students for espionage, take over companies through hostile methods, or exploit tech companies' data. In recent years, American officials have been singularly focused on President Xi Jinping and his intentions toward Taiwan. Both the US and China are racing to advance their artificial intelligence technologies, with each nation believing it critical to maintaining a military and economic edge. According to the New York Times, the CIA and the Pentagon's Defense Intelligence Agency have set up new centers specifically dedicated to gathering intelligence on China. US officials have enhanced their capabilities to intercept electronic communications using spy planes along China's coastline. In March this year, Reuters reported that during his presidency in 2019, Donald Trump ordered the CIA to carry out a clandestine campaign on Chinese social media, aiming to sway public opinion against the Chinese government. FBI Director Christopher Wray has stated that the spy conflict with China is more expansive than the Cold War-era espionage between the US and the Soviet Union. Due to its massive population, China holds a numerical advantage in this battle. However, the US faces challenges in recruiting informants in China, where it once had a highly sophisticated spy network. A decade ago, Chinese counterintelligence officials dismantled that network after exposing the informants' identities. Since then, the CIA has struggled to rebuild its presence.
I don't think it's the numbers. I think it's the fact that China is the world's largest surveillance state. And so China monitors all of its citizens' communications, all of its citizens' internet traffic, all of its citizens' public statements, right? So in a way that the US just does not do. I've seen it in demonstrations, and a bubble appears with your name, your identity number, your police record. It's the ability of China to have that kind of unrestricted surveillance on a massive scale that makes it difficult for any nation to run intelligence agents there. Numbers have less to do with it than the fact that you've got, and Xi Jinping may be the only leader left in the world who admires Joseph Stalin.
Nevertheless, rebuilding its spy network in China remains a top priority for the CIA. In 2021, the agency established a dedicated mission center for China, the first of its kind for any nation. Over the past 2 years, the CIA has doubled its budget for operations targeting China. While both countries continue to engage in espionage and steal each other's secrets, the Chinese Communist Party and President Xi's government also crack down on dissenting voices. The Chinese government is known for its secrecy, going as far as to hide internal upheavals. For instance, when top Chinese officials, such as former Defense Minister Li Shangfu and Foreign Minister Qin Gang, were ousted, they disappeared without explanation.
It has a disadvantage in the unpopularity of the government. So look at Jack Ma. Jack Ma, the most successful entrepreneur in China, now lives in Tokyo. If you want to talk to Jack Ma, you don't have to worry about Chinese intelligence. You just take a taxi cab. So that's their biggest weakness, is they're just not a popular government.
In contrast, Western societies are more open, often making them more vulnerable and easier targets. However, the way the US positions itself as a force for good, immune to criticism, is flawed. As the Chinese state-owned Global Times aptly remarked,
when Americans openly discuss these activities, there is no sense of shame or guilt. Instead, there is even a somewhat inexplicable sense of justice, as if engaging in espionage is a privilege exclusively enjoyed by the US.
Lewis believes this has not had much effect on the country's popularity.
people trying to enter the US illegally. They had 3 million people enter the US last year as illegal immigrants. You don't see illegal immigration to China or Russia. People are trying to leave China or Russia. And so ultimately, we know which society is more attractive. But the US policy has to deal with the fact that for most of the rest of the world, that black and white moral line isn't as clear. And they say one great power is much like another. I don't happen to agree with that, but I understand why people think that. And that's another place where we'll need to simply making a speech saying let's all face a rule-based order, except when it's a problem for us, isn't going to persuade anyone. So,
but even though this aggressive maneuvering and increase of espionage indicates a rise in tensions, both countries are wary of letting the situation escalate into full-blown hostilities. The greatest risk may be miscalculation on both sides.
Both the Americans and the Chinese are worried about miscalculation, that one side will do something to the other, and that will lead to war. And so finding ways to reduce the chances of miscalculation. You know that the National Security Advisor was in China last week. The Department of Defense is trying to talk with its Chinese counterparts. The Chinese themselves have expressed concern about miscalculation. And that's sort of the first step in treaties on this stuff, is how do you make sure that each side trusts each other enough that an accident doesn't lead to war. And that's probably the best thing to focus on right now.